Sam Pike had not been spotted in Clove Hill for 14 months, ever since the fierce winter storm that swept through the canyons and ripped shingles from every roof in the town. Some believed he had perished in the blizzard. Others whispered about a collapse up north, while a few murmured dark rumors of bloodstains and a body hidden beneath his porch. Regardless of the reality, when he finally showed up in early summer, driving a mule-worn cart along the ridge road with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a heavy bundle wrapped in canvas under sacks of salt and dried meat, no one dared inquire about his absence. He entered as quietly as twilight, boots stirring dust, his beard longer than ever before, and his eyes sunken into a hollow that seemed almost unnatural. The general store owner, Tom Jackson, forced a smile when Pike pushed open the door that morning. It was the kind of smile a man might give when facing a bear uncertain if it hungers. "Back for nails or rope?" Jackson asked, instinctively reaching beneath the counter where he kept his old Smith & Wesson. Pike did not look at him, but simply laid 4 silver coins on the worn wood and gestured toward the iron tools hanging on the far wall. Jackson retrieved them without speaking, his palms clammy. Outside, Pike loaded the tools into his cart next to a broken saddle and a pile of firewood he had chopped himself by the creek. The sun blazed down on the parched dirt road. Horses snorted in the distance, yet Pike moved as if carved from stone and shadow, detached from the world of the living. People observed him from windows and behind curtains, their gazes shifting toward the canvas-covered form in the back of the wagon, something elongated and uneven, tied with rope. It might have been a deer, possibly, or a bundle of fence posts, yet the manner in which he moved around it, delicately, protectively, never allowing it to leave his sight, stirred a sense of unease. Upon entering the tavern, the piano fell silent. A card game paused mid-round. The bartender, old Eddie, who once poured whiskey for Pike on the night his daughter disappeared, cleared his throat but remained silent. Pike looked older, not only in the wrinkles etched on his face, but in the posture of his shoulders, in the stillness that clung to him like a shadow. He requested no drink. He did not sit. Instead, he stood briefly, surveying the room, then turned and exited without a word. They let him be. No one followed. No one cared to. Evening was approaching as he arrived at the town's edge once more, the mule ambling slowly, dragging its hooves through patches of gravel and sagebrush. He did not pause at the chapel, did not glance toward the cemetery, did not acknowledge the boy waving from the blacksmith's yard. His gaze remained fixed ahead, set on the path curving toward the southern ravine. The route to his ranch, the land tended solely by him, a place spoken of only in hushed tones. The sky glowed orange behind him as he passed the ancient hanging tree where 3 rusty horseshoes swayed in the breeze like iron wind chimes. When he arrived at the crossroads near Miller's Hill, the mule came to a halt all by itself. Sam dismounted, stretched his back, and circled the cart. He pulled back the canvas a little, revealing old wood, rusty metal hinges, and a hint of something intricately carved. Delicate floral patterns. It was a coffin. No nameplate, no writing. He gazed at it for a long moment before covering it again. Nobody had asked about it. Nobody dared to. That evening, beneath a vast sky filled with silent stars, he reached his ranch gate. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open. Tall weeds had overgrown while the fence was half collapsed. He tied the mule, unloaded his tools, and left the cart where it rested. The coffin he lifted all by himself, slowly, with care. Inside the house, everything was untouched. Dust on the mantel, a single teacup on the table, an apron hanging where Eddie's wife used to place it. He placed the coffin right in the middle of the main room, lit a lamp, and removed the canvas. Within was not a body, but many small treasures: a locket, a doll missing one eye, a Bible burnt along the edges, and a little blue dress stained with a brown, dried mark. Closing the lid gently, he sank into the closest chair and did not move until dawn. No tears fell, no prayers were spoken, only stillness remained. Outside, the wind shook the shutters, but Sam stayed frozen, haunted not by spirits but by memories, something heavier than guilt and colder than sorrow. The following morning, he skipped town. Silently, behind the shed, he dug a deep and neat hole. He lined the grave with stones and placed the coffin in the soil without any ritual. No sign to mark the spot, no spoken words, only earth, sweat, and a heavy silence that slowly wrapped itself around what had been. That night, as the sun poured red over the hills and bats awoke in the barn rafters, he sat again on the porch with his pipe unlit in his hand. A storm gathered on the distant edge of the prairie, the wind shifting with the heavy scent of rain and dust. Then he heard it, the clinking of harnesses, the sharp bark of a mule belonging to a trader, the quiet laughter of men who did not fit the stillness. He turned his head. A wagon was coming, unevenly swaying along the path. 4 men rode it, none from Clove Hill, wearing rough clothing without any badges. On the back of the wagon lay a figure, chained by wrists and ankles. A woman, barely dressed, her body smeared with blood and dirt, her hair tangled and stuck to her face. The wagon stopped just outside his gate. One of the men jumped down, spat into the dirt, and shouted without directing the words anywhere specific. Fresh cargo. Traded her from Jasper's Pit for 2 barrels of kerosene and a busted compass. Strong girl, but won't speak or cry. Might be broken upstairs. Anybody want her? Make a bid before she bleeds out. Sam did not get up. His eyes did not flicker. He watched as they forced the girl into a standing position, chains rattling, her knees trembling in the dry grass. She raised her head slowly, and in the fading light of dusk, their eyes locked. His expression stayed the same, but beneath the calm, a sudden tension snapped like an overstretched thread. He rose from where he stood, descended the porch steps, and walked at an unhurried pace toward the wagon. The men stiffened slightly, one placing a hand near his belt knife. "We're not looking to cause trouble, sir. Just trying to get rid of a burden." Sam remained silent. He paused beside the cart, glancing at the girl once more. Her wounds, marks, and burns clear as day. Then his gaze fell on the chain threaded through the floorboards. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the binding before anyone could react. The girl wavered, but stayed on her feet. One of the men took a step forward. "Hold on now." Eddie turned around, simply turned. The man immediately halted. Sam threw a pouch of coins to the ground. Then he lifted the girl, chains and all, carrying her back toward the house. She made no effort to resist. She did not utter a word. However, her eyes never left him, not even once. In that silent gaze, as the wind stirred dust across the land and distant thunder rumbled behind the hills, something timeless passed between them. It was not recognition or thanks. It was something older, something like a mutual understanding or a warning, or perhaps a bit of both. The chains dug into her flesh with every bump of the wagon, the iron too constricted, the links corroded and biting through scabbed wounds that had not had the chance to mend. She did not cry out, did not plead, not when the wagon struck a rut and she crashed against the side rail, not when one of the guards chuckled and threw stale bread her way, fully aware it would fall just beyond her grasp, not even when they halted on a ridge overlooking a house that seemed to have forgotten joy long ago, and the man who appeared on the porch resembled something carved from ash rather than a living being. Fear had deserted Lydia a long time ago. She felt it leave her body on the second night underground, when the last candle flickered out and she discovered what darkness meant when it possessed teeth. After that came the cold, then the hunger, then the silence, then the names of the others murmured into memory before they disappeared. And now she was here, alive still, barely, but not broken, not in the way they anticipated. The man approached them deliberately, dust swirling around his boots, his rifle hanging loosely but untouched, his gaze impossible to read. One of the traders straightened up, shifting his hand near the handle of a pistol, yet the man remained unperturbed. He regarded them as if they were insignificant, as though he had encountered far worse, had acted worse, and nothing they possessed compared to the burdens he bore in his eyes. He refrained from asking who she was, why she was shackled, what had been done to her, or what she had done in return. His focus was solely on her, not on the bruises that marked her skin, the dried blood staining her dress, the iron cuff fused to her wrist, or the burns that etched a fractured pattern across her shoulder like fragmented scripture. He stared into her eyes, and inside her something tensed, anticipating the familiar reaction, a flash of disgust, pity, curiosity, or desire. But instead there was only emptiness, a profound stillness, the kind that might signify madness, or a kindness so worn out it could no longer be named. The man faced the dealer, who was chewing on a reed, and spoke with a voice that cracked like dry bark. "What is the price for the chain?" The dealer blinked, spat aside, and replied, "It is not about the metal, friend. This chain is tied to a debt. There is no bill of sale, but it comes from Jasper's stock. You know Jasper, meaner than snakes and twice as tough to kill. He has a dozen like this down south, but this one is trouble. She killed a handler with a belt buckle. We were told to get rid of her quietly. Figured we might stop by and see if anyone wanted a discount on madness." The man remained expressionless. "How much for the chain?" The dealer chuckled nervously now. "You do not want this trouble. We will be blamed all the same if she turns up skinned and buried on your land. Are you seeking to hang for someone else's wrongdoings?" Sam Pike reached inside his coat, not for a weapon, but for a pouch of coins wrapped in oilcloth. He dropped it to the ground between them. Silver coins clattered against the stone. The other men watched with tension and uncertainty. The dealer bent, opened the pouch, his eyes briefly widening to see the contents. "Jesus Christ," he murmured. "You're serious?" Pike stayed still. The dealer shrugged and gestured to one of his men, who took a file and started cutting through the chain. Lydia remained motionless. She did not react when the metal gave way. She did not flinch as her weight shifted forward, and she had to steady herself on bloodied knees. Not even when Pike stepped forward and lifted her effortlessly into his arms, her body as light and cold as damp fabric. She anticipated the usual rough grip, fumbling hands, and a murmured warning. Instead, he held her gently, as if she were delicate but not valuable, as though she was already fractured and he simply wanted to prevent her from falling apart during the journey inside. The traders mounted their horses, now laughing nervously and eager to depart. "Good luck, stranger. one called over his shoulder. "If she doesn't overpower you the first night, maybe you're crazier than she is." Inside the house, the air was thick with dust and the scent of citrus oil. The walls did not groan as they entered. The silence was almost suffocating. He carried her down a short corridor, past a closed room, and entered a small chamber without a bed, just a cot, a basin, and a tiny stove by the wall. He set her down carefully, stepped back, and shut the door. She heard the bolt slide into place, not to trap her inside, but to shield her from the outside world. A moment passed, then 2. Then the door opened once more, and he came back with a bucket of warm water, a cloth, and a folded gray garment. He said nothing. He simply placed them beside the cot and left again. No questions, no offers, no threats. She carefully tore the damaged dress away from her skin in fragments. The injuries looked worse than she recalled. Angry crimson gashes, some infected, others clean, all aching. Taking a cloth, she gently cleaned each wound, wincing but staying silent. She wiped the blood from her arms, neck, and inner thighs. Then, with caution, she lifted the garment he had left behind. It was a plain dress made of soft flannel. Though aged, it was spotless. The hem had been let out, designed for someone taller than her. Inside the collar, a faint but still readable name appeared. Rose. Not hers and never had been, but it belonged to someone important. Someone he had loved deeply or laid to rest or both in his past. Lydia slipped it on. When he came back, hours later, carrying a bowl with broth and cornbread wrapped in a linen cloth, she was sitting on the cot, her hair still damp from washing, her gaze fixed on the wall. She said nothing, and he did not expect her to. He placed the food down and started to leave, then stopped. "It belonged to my wife," he told her, not looking in her direction. "You don't have to wear it." She remained silent, no answer needed. This time, he closed the door behind him slowly. That night, falling asleep proved difficult. She lay under the blanket, attuned to the sounds filling the house. The groan of aged wood, the breeze brushing dry twigs against the rooftop, the far-off howls of coyotes resonating through the canyon. Yet there were no footsteps approaching. No keys twisting in locks, no heavy breathing lingering near the doorway. Only silence, accompanied by the faint aroma of something smoldering gently in the fireplace. Pure flames, no smoke, no hint of rot. Somewhere within the shadows, Lydia finally allowed her fingers to loosen. Her hands had been tightly clenched for so long she had failed to notice the dull ache. She was unsure what the man desired from her. Perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps everything. Yet in that instant, for the first time in many months, she realized she was no longer a victim. She had become a mystery that no one had dared to resolve. Deep in her core, inside the places untouched even by the cruelest men, a subtle, keen sensation awakened. Something older than mere survival. Not hope, at least not yet, but the trace of a memory. It did not start with words or touch, but with the creak of a door intentionally left unlocked. Sam Pike was never one for formalities, yet he had been brought up to secure doors before nightfall, to fasten latches and draw shutters, especially in this place where the wind might carry voices from beyond the living. Still, the evening after he found her lying in the cot wearing his late wife's gown, he left her door unlatched. He did not utter a single word, nor did he glance back as he removed her empty bowl from the room. Even when her eyes followed him with a calmness that no longer resembled fear, but a far more unsettling vigilance, watching without condemnation. She gave no thanks, and he had not anticipated any. But in that silent moment, something passed between them. A pause, a change, the quiet of a home starting to breathe in a new way. She did not fall asleep right away. Sitting on the cot, arms wrapped around her knees, her bare feet resting on the polished floorboards, she wore the dress that no longer smelled of decay or smoke, but instead carried notes of soap and cedar. Her hair had dried into soft waves upon her collarbone, and when the breeze drifted through the small window above the cot, she lifted her face toward it, not seeking comfort, but a reminder that the world outside was still turning, that she was no longer beneath it. Sam sat below at the kitchen table, his back turned to the fire while a tin cup filled with cooling tea rested in his hand. He did not drink it. He had stopped the moment they discovered the blood behind the chicken coop, and nothing more. Rose had disappeared between breaths, and by the time anyone realized to look, it was already too late. The land had claimed her as it always did with the weak and the slow, but she was neither. This meant someone took her away, or something far worse happened. Since that day, he spoke less, labored more, and buried secrets in the soil deeper than he would ever confess. Now, there was this girl called Lydia. He never asked her name aloud, but it came to him regardless, engraved on a metal piece she wore beneath her collarbone, embedded painfully into a burn scar as if someone needed to remember through cruelty. That evening, she surprised him. She descended the stairs barefoot, moving carefully, like someone used to places where silence was safety and sudden sounds brought pain. He heard her footsteps long before he saw her. The gentle creak of a step he never bothered to fix, and the held breath as the wind shifted. She paused at the kitchen doorway without crossing inside, simply stood there, watching the flames flicker on the hearth and observing him all while he pretended not to notice her. He did not turn around, but asked without looking, "Are you hungry once more?" She shook her head. He sensed it rather than saw it. The air shifted subtly with the motion. He reached into the cupboard and took out a folded cloth, placing it carefully on the table. Wrapped inside was a small carving knife. Not one used in the kitchen, but something more delicate and ancient, designed specifically for shaping wood. He slid it toward her side of the table. "My wife used to carve spoons," he explained. "She did it when she could not fall asleep. Said that working with her hands helped quiet her mind." Lydia moved forward gradually, her toes curling against the chilly floor. She did not touch the knife just yet. However, she sat down. That was enough for now. What followed was slower and more peculiar. She remained silent, and he did not press her to speak. The days slipped by with work carried out side by side. She repaired whatever she could find: torn sacks, broken hinges, and cracked boards. He allowed her to do so, never remarking when she moved tools he had not used in many years, or meticulously arranged nails by size in orderly lines upon the table. She did not leave the property once, not even to the ridge. From the porch, he observed as she dragged a broken chair into the sunlight and sat with her back resting against the barn wall, holding a small piece of leather in one hand and a tiny knife in the other. She etched lines into the leather, not designs or signs, but simply lines, perhaps one for each day or every night she failed to dream. The steady rhythm of her work became woven into the house itself, like the ticking of the old clock or the way the floorboards creaked when the temperature fell. After 2 weeks of sharing the same space without any words exchanged, The first genuine interaction finally occurred. It was evening. Sam had just come back from inspecting the northern fence, carrying a coil of barbed wire over his shoulder. The sun had quickly disappeared, bringing a sharp chill that marked the onset of early autumn. He entered through the back door, his boots thick with red dust, and almost missed it. The sound of movement above. It was not the steady kind, but the searching kind. He moved slowly and hesitantly toward the noise and discovered the door to the shuttered room slightly open. The room had remained untouched since Rose vanished. Nobody had entered, not even for dusting. But now Eddie was inside, standing barefoot in the center, her hand hovering just above the dresser where Rose's music box lay shut, coated in dust and a strand of spiderweb. She didn't glance at him when he stepped into the doorway. She remained still. Her fingers shook, not out of fear, but self-control. Then she did something Sam couldn't grasp. She turned deliberately and walked past him without looking or pausing, and as she brushed by, the back of her hand barely touched his coat sleeve. A soft whisper, a flicker of warmth, an almost invisible contact. Yet Sam felt it like a thunderclap. She had touched him on purpose. Not a slip, no hesitation, just enough to convey, "I see you." The following morning, the music box rested on the kitchen table. She must have brought it down sometime during the night. He gazed at it for quite a while before reaching out to brush the dust from its edge. When he lifted the lid, the melody did not play. It had been broken for many years. Yet inside, there was a single curled piece of paper. A note. 3 words, penned in tight, slanted handwriting. "Don't forget her." He flipped the paper over. It was blank, no name, no date, just those 3 words. He put the box aside without saying a word when she arrived to have breakfast. But he did notice she had styled her hair differently that morning, pulled back with a worn blue ribbon he had never seen before. It had once belonged to Rose. He recognized it because he had found it hidden beneath her pillow the week after she disappeared. He had not touched it since then. Gradually, the balance changed. Not with noise or spectacle. Instead, it shifted slowly, like roots inching beneath a doorframe. Lydia began to hum softly while she worked, not tunes, but fragmented, breathy, fragile sounds. Sam found himself pausing more frequently, not from fatigue, but because he did not want to break the delicate atmosphere. She moved as if she belonged there, not in a possessive sense, but with the calm assurance of someone who had endured harsher trials and was no longer frightened by shadows. She kept a bowl of dried herbs on the windowsill, filled with items she never named. Occasionally, in the middle of the night, he heard her whispering, neither in English nor any language he could identify. Her voice was low, rhythmic, like an ancient prayer. He did not inquire. One evening, after fixing the warped barn door damaged in a recent summer storm, he entered the house to find the table set for 2. There were no candles or decorations, only 2 bowls and 2 cups arranged simply. Lydia stood by the stove, serving stew. She did not look at him but spoke softly. "You built this house to forget, but it remembers." Sam did not reply. He simply sat down and ate quietly. When they finished, she reached across the table and placed a single carved spoon in his hand. The spoon was rough and unrefined, yet genuine. The handle resembled a tree branch, and its tip curved just enough to hold more than expected. He turned it thoughtfully in his palm. She offered no smile or explanation. She simply rose and left the room. Later that evening, As the flames dwindled and shadows lengthened across the floorboards, he carefully set the spoon next to the music box resting on the mantelpiece. For the very first time in more than a year, he spoke her name aloud. Not Lydia's, but Rose's. "I am still here," he murmured softly. "I have not forgotten." Somewhere above him, the floor creaked once, then all was still and quiet. That very night, the direction of the wind shifted. Neither of them found any rest. The storm arrived suddenly, not like those that gather slowly with thick clouds and restless wildlife, but the kind that falls from a clear sky like swift retribution. It was almost evening, and Sam Pike stood in the southern field, inspecting the fence where coyotes had been nibbling the wire, creeping in with the patience of scavengers rather than the desperation of the starving. The atmosphere had been motionless all day, heavy with that quiet tension before autumn, when even the breeze seems to hold its breath and the insects slow their movements, as if waiting for something unseen. Eddie was in the barn, quietly occupied as always, sorting the dried herbs gathered from the hill that week. Rosemary, pine needles, and a bitter herb Sam could not place but had learned not to question. The sky changed not to darkness, but to a shade too intense to seem natural, a smoky, metallic purple resembling a bruise along the horizon. Sam straightened from the post he was fixing, glanced toward the distant hills, then back at the farmhouse. He did not run. He never ran. Still, he moved quicker than usual, throwing the wire and hammer into the crate and swinging onto his horse just as the first powerful gust of wind roared across the field, sending the chickens shrieking into their coop. When Sam arrived at the barn, Lydia was already standing outside. She had no coat or shoes, her arms hanging loosely by her sides, her face lifted toward the sky as if she were listening to something far beyond them. Something profound, something genuine, something timeless. Her hair whipped wildly around her face, yet she remained unfazed when the first flash of lightning split the ridge. It was too distant to strike, but close enough to shake the ground. Pike jumped down and grabbed her arm, shouting over the gusts, "Get inside!" But she stood frozen. Her eyes were wide open, her lips moving silently, and then her hand abruptly extended, pointing not at the house, but toward the north, toward the ancient pine tree leaning over the cattle shed, the very tree he had intended to cut down last spring, but had left standing, whether out of memory, neglect, or something more difficult to explain. He spun around just in time to witness the sky tear apart. Lightning struck the tree not with a strike, but as an eruption. A fierce, white flash that illuminated the entire ranch for a brief moment before the sound followed with intense rage and the earth shook under its roar. The tree did not collapse. It exploded, sending wood and fire flying like bones thrown in anger, the air thick with smoke and the sharp scent of ozone. Sam staggered backward, almost losing balance, ears buzzing, heart racing. His eyes darted toward the shed. It remained standing. Barely. One corner smoldered and the wall split right down the center. The cattle inside mooed loudly, frightened. Then he glanced at her. Lydia had not moved. She stood like a rock in the current, her body trembling yet rooted, her gaze fixed on the smoking wreckage. Only then did she look at him. He did not question how she had known. He did not wonder why she had kept silent, nor why she had neither fled nor cried out. Instead, he reached for her hand, not as a gesture of authority, but as one of empathy, and together they pushed the gate open, guiding the animals outside one after another. The wind fought against them fiercely, while sparks flickered along the hems of their clothing. Moving in sync, her hands steady on the trembling sides of the frightened creatures, his voice calm and reassuring. They persevered. It took a full hour to bring every animal to safety. An hour filled with sweat, smoke, and thunder rolling overhead, like mighty beings trampling through a blazing sky. Finally, with the last calf secured inside the stone shelter near the feed room, Lydia sank to her knees in the mud, breath catching silently in deep, heavy gulps. Sam knelt close, remaining silent, simply observing the rise and fall of her shoulders. After the storm had passed and the flashes of lightning disappeared into someone else's realm, Sam took her inside and seated her near the hearth. Her hands were scorched, the flesh red and blistered in various spots. He brought ointment and water, working quietly as he wrapped her fingers with strips of linen, avoiding her gaze. Yet she watched him. When he was done, she reached into the pocket of the dress, still his wife's, still too big, and produced a small brass object. It was a key, ancient, worn, the type designed for boxes or cabinets. She placed it on the table between them, her bandaged hands slightly trembling. "She showed it to me," she said, her voice rough, soft, barely audible but heavy as thunder. "In the dream, I saw her. She stood by the pine where the lightning struck. She told me not to fear fire, that it only consumes what is already empty." Sam gazed at the key. He understood what it unlocked. He remembered what he had hidden in the back of the pantry. Under the floorboards he had nailed down himself with hands long since forgotten how to be gentle. That night, after Lydia had fallen into a sleep so deep she seemed lifeless, Sam opened the concealed compartment behind the pantry and retrieved the box. He had not touched it for 2 years. Inside lay Rose's letters, those she had written upon first arriving, when she still had faith in this land and in him, before the earth turned bitter and something within her went quiet. The key fit flawlessly. By the flickering firelight, he read the letters, every sentence cutting like a blade, every signature a haunting presence. At the bottom of the pile was a photograph. Rose standing before the barn, her hand resting on the side of a horse long gone, her eyes shining. He gazed at that image for a long while until the fire eased into glowing embers and the wind outside ceased its ominous howl. When dawn broke, Lydia was already standing, with her hands wrapped in fresh cloth. Barefoot in the field, she watched the smoke winding upward from the charred remains of the tree. Sam stepped out onto the porch, holding the photograph. She faced him, her expression unreadable. He did not say a word, simply extended the photo towards her. She glanced once, then carefully folded it and slid it beneath the bandage on her arm. Not to conceal it, but to protect it. Then she nodded, turned back toward the field, and said without looking over her shoulder, "It was not the storm itself. It was the weight of the memory of what you failed to do. The lightning only followed that sorrow home." And in that moment, he understood. The rumor began at the general store, as often happens, with flour scattered on the counter and weary women sharing looks that spoke louder than their words. Someone mentioned seeing the girl barefoot, crossing Pike's Field before the storm struck, her head tilted as if catching whispers carried by the breeze. Another claimed she overheard the girl speaking to the horses, not mere murmurs or whistles, but actual phrases in a language unknown to her. By week's end, the girl was nameless in town, reduced to a figure known only as the one who came in chains, or worse, Pike's witch. The preacher's wife refused to pass the gate whenever the girl lingered outside. A boy insisted the girl touched his dog, which then howled endlessly and shunned water. When milk turned sour too quickly in 3 separate homes, and when an ancient grave on Miller's Ridge collapsed during a heavy rain, revealing bones without a coffin to explain them, the gossip turned bitter. Sam recognized the signs of a town shifting. He had lived through it before, long ago, when a woman in Pine Creek took her own life and the town's men buried her child alongside her, pronouncing the family line cursed. He recalled the pitchforks, the hardened gaze when logic gave way to zeal. Now that same atmosphere hovered again, in the steps following him at the blacksmith's, in the silence that fell when he entered the saloon, voices lowering just enough to disguise blame as discussion. However, Lydia did not appear scared. She moved around the ranch as though the storm had loosened something inside her, as if she no longer required anyone's approval to be herself. She walked without shoes, quiet and steady, her hands healed into hands marked by scars but still skilled. She crafted small, delicate charms from twine and wood, bone buttons and bird feathers, items she would hang on nails or above doorways. Sam never questioned her. He observed as she braided 3 strands of black horsehair above the chicken coop, softly whispering under her breath while the birds clucked and shifted, strangely calm. He saw her kneel by the well, place both hands on the stone edge and remain there for more than an hour, completely still. At night, she sat near the fire with a book she could not read, flipping pages by touch alone. She never mentioned the town and never asked to go back. Yet her silence no longer seemed like avoidance, but more like a quiet readiness. When they arrived, it was not as a mob. They came with sturdy boots, hats shading from the hot afternoon sun, and firm voices, 8 in total, including 2 women, standing just at the border of Pike's land, weapons sheathed but their gazes sharp and unyielding. They did not shout. Instead, they remained silent until Sam descended from the barn to meet them by the gate. The oldest, Martin Withers, stepped forward, his hands marked by hard work and his face deeply lined and hollowed from years of harboring resentment, like water held in a cracked vessel. "We want her gone," he stated plainly, without anger, only the harsh conviction of a man certain of what was right. Sam did not flinch. "Why?" Withers looked him straight in the eye and said, "You know why. Ever since she arrived, the cattle have been stillborn. The crops failed too soon, and the wind never blows favorably. My boy says she speaks to things invisible to him. My wife wakes with terror, claiming she has seen her standing at the foot of the bed, silently watching." Sam studied him for a long moment before replying. "Did she ever touch your boy?" "No." "Did she come near your bed?" "No." "Then perhaps the problem lies within your own home." Withers stepped closer. "You think this is just old wives' tales? Death clings to her like a shadow. She moves as if she has been buried and returned warped. We have witnessed strange things. You have seen them too." Sam's hand rested gently on the post. He spoke calmly, without raising his voice. "She cannot speak." "Silent does not mean deaf," someone said behind Withers, "and deaf does not mean blind. She notices things she should not, things we have no business seeing." Sam turned his head, catching the figure behind the curtains. Lydia stood just inside the house, her eyes steady, hands relaxed at her sides. She did not appear frightened. Not of them. Not of this moment. Simply exhausted. Sam took a single step forward, his boots pressing into the earth firmly. "You all arrived because you're scared, but you don't understand what it is you fear. That is why you're dangerous." Withers grimaced. "We came to defend the town." Sam's jaw clenched. From a girl who has not spoken since she got here? From a girl who knows where bodies will be found before anyone discovers them, said the woman beside Withers, arms folded. From a girl who neither cries nor bleeds when she should, from something unnatural. Sam stood still. Then leave. There is no space here for your fear. We do not want to return with fire, the woman warned. We have seen the destruction caused when men make the wrong choices. Sam leaned against the gate. So have I, he said, waiting silently. Withers gazed at him for a few more seconds, then turned away. The others followed without a word. No gunfire erupted. No warnings were issued. Still, the message was clear. Sam observed them riding off before turning toward the house, where Lydia remained standing exactly as he had left her. He climbed the porch steps, opened the door, and met her gaze. "They will return," he said. She gave a simple nod. No further words were exchanged. That night, the fire remained unlit. They ate cold bread and cheese, sitting in silence while the wind whispered outside. There was no movement beyond the walls, but the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the air itself was holding its breath. After 2 days, the first body was discovered. It was not a person, but a cow, killed not for food, but as part of a ritual, its ribs engraved with symbols, and its hooves scorched. The sheriff came to question Sam, though he did so indirectly. He inquired whether Sam had noticed any strangers around the property, or if Lydia had mentioned anything about the mountains. Sam neither lied nor volunteered information, remaining silent. Lydia stayed inside the house for 3 days without stepping out. Then, unexpectedly, she went into the yard and began planting seeds. Not straight rows, but circles, wild and perfect yet seemingly meaningless patterns in the soil. She hummed quietly as she worked. Soon after, birds returned by the dozens, too many to count, perching in the trees, fences, and rafters, watching and singing. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, they vanished without a trace. On the 7th day, Withers came back. He was alone, no boots on his feet, no hat on his head. His complexion was pale, and his voice lacked emotion. "I was mistaken," he said. "My daughter's boy fell into the well. She was missing. Your girl. Gone for a moment, perhaps. But she discovered him. Heard a sound that no one else noticed. She pulled him out before his lungs failed. He is breathing now. His eyes are open." Sam waited in silence. Withers looked down. "You brought her here for a purpose. I don't know what it is, but I won't return. Not with fire, not with anything." Sam gave a single nod. Withers walked away. That evening, Sam entered the garden. Lydia was kneeling on the ground, her palms covered in dirt, her hair tangled with leaves. He sat beside her slowly, his joints aching. She didn't look up. He said, "They will keep whispering." She answered quietly, "They always do." "You aren't scared. I've endured worse." He gazed at her then, and for the very first time he reached out, not demanding, not because he had to, but simply to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Her eyes closed softly. Her breathing calmed. Between them, the silence transformed. It became a boundary, a connection, a vow, not to be ordinary, not to be fully comprehended, but to be truly heard. And maybe that was what really mattered. The initial snow arrived on the night Sam Pike failed to return home. It was unusually early for snowfall, Unexpected, dry, and sharp like ground bone dust carried by the breeze, blanketing the ridge with a thin, deceptive layer of white that even quieted the howling coyotes. Lydia had stayed awake throughout the evening, straining to hear the gate latch, the creak of leather, or the familiar knock of his boots on the front steps. Yet, as darkness deepened and no sound came except the soft rustle of wind through the fragile stalks in the garden, a tight knot formed inside her. She had sensed by dusk that something was wrong. There were clues, small but unmistakable now. The chickens had not left the coop that morning, not even when she scattered feed. The milk tasted bitter, and 3 of the protective charms she had carefully woven and hung from the eaves had fallen overnight despite the lack of any wind to explain it. She attempted to ignore her instincts because the deeper understanding, the part of her that had endured in silence, blood, and fire, revealed the truth before her mind could accept it. Sam Pike was not simply late. Sam had been taken. She moved with purpose, layering her clothes carefully, slipping on the coat Sam had given her when the initial frost arrived a fortnight ago. The coat was oversized, draping from her shoulders like discarded skin, yet it carried his scent: smoky ash, fresh cedar, and a subtle hint of metal. She packed a satchel with the tools she no longer doubted she needed, wrapped her fingers in cloth to guard against the chill, and exited the house through the back door, stepping into the soft glow of the snow-covered moon. The path he took led toward the northern pass, where the terrain dipped into winding canyons and dense pine woods, a place the locals avoided after nightfall, even during summer. He had traveled alone to exchange supplies with the elderly homesteader near Bitter Hollow, and was meant to return by mid-afternoon. Yet he never did, and she understood the reason. The blood was easy to spot. Not a lot, just a single streak on a twisted fence post near the junction, partly covered by frost, its color already fading into a rusty brown rather than bright red. Then came a boot print, dragged slightly. Then another one appeared. A path. She pursued it right away, stepping into the woods where the shadows grew dense and the falling snow seemed reluctant to reach the ground. Her breathing was calm and steady, neither panicked nor strained, her eyes darting through the brush like an instinctive tracker. Her pace quickened beyond reason, propelled not by fear, but by a sharp sense of purpose. She could picture him, his figure bent, wrists bound behind his back, blood dripping from his head. She sensed the rope biting into his skin, the boot pressing against his ribs, the heat of furious breath on his neck. This was not her memory. It was a vision, neither his nor hers, a mutual impression of pain etched into the air like lingering smoke. By the time she arrived at the clearing, the chill had completely faded. The wind had dropped entirely, and snowflakes drifted slowly in spirals around a fire that seemed too neatly made to be coincidental. 4 men were gathered nearby, a mix of strangers and familiar faces. She recognized 2 of them. One was from the wagon that had brought her, the man who had laughed when she struggled to lift the bread. The other was the blacksmith's cousin, the one who had pressed her with questions about her scars. The third man wore a badge he had no right to, and the fourth, broad-shouldered and silent, held a rifle aimed at the man kneeling. Sam Pike was bleeding from a split lip and a cut at his temple, his hands bound tightly, his coat taken off, his shirt ripped, and his face turned downward, not out of surrender, but to conceal something they had not managed to break. They had not yet noticed her. Not until she stepped out from the trees and the firelight reflected the silver gleam in her eyes. The man with the badge turned around, visibly surprised, then smirked. "Well, look who the devil brought back." She made no reply and continued forward. One step followed by another, her arms relaxed at her sides, palms open. The man with the rifle shifted his aim toward her, but the man with the badge raised a hand to stop him. "No, let her come. She's exactly what we want." He spat into the snow. "He's only the warning." Sam lifted his head slightly, just enough to catch sight of her. His eyes were glazed with loss of blood, yet remained lively and focused. Between them, a silent understanding passed, requiring no spoken words. It was neither a beg, nor a warning, nor surprise. It was a silent pact shared in quiet intensity. She moved into the open space and whispered so softly it barely stirred the air. "Release him." The man wearing the badge chuckled. "Or else what? Do you think you can kill us with a stare?" He stepped toward her. "We know what you are. We've seen it. The preacher's wife won't sleep indoors anymore. Withers hears you among his walls. We assumed Pike was your pawn, but maybe he's just too foolish to recognize your true nature." She stood motionless, holding his gaze. Then, without any cue, she dropped her bag onto the snow and opened it. All of them recoiled instinctively. She sensed the fear, almost tasting it in the air. Yet all she revealed was a bunch of fabric and bone. She knelt down and began to arrange the items carefully. Twine, feathers, ash, teeth, a child's button, and a ripped page from a book. The blacksmith's cousin sneered, "What on earth is this?" She replied softly, "Names." "What do you mean?" She raised her eyes to meet theirs. "These are the names you lost when you foolishly chose to make gods out of your fears." The man with the badge stepped forward, rifle aimed. "Enough of this." Yet he did not shoot. His finger would not pull the trigger. A weight pressed down on his chest. Not physical, but heavy nonetheless. He lurched backward. The fire burned lower. The wind grew fierce, cutting through them like a sharp blade. She stood tall, her hair swirling wildly around her face, her eyes dark, or perhaps simply mirroring the flickering flames. "You believe you understand what I am," she said, "because your memory holds on to pain more strongly than it does the truth." Her hand rose slightly, a subtle gesture. Suddenly, the rifle slipped from the man's grasp, tumbling several feet away. His scream was not one of agony, but something far darker. Sam dropped to his knees. Lydia approached him and untied his hands. The rope fell away like discarded skin. He said nothing. He was unable to speak. She helped him to stand, heavy against her but steady with every step. The men did not move after them. They could not. They remained rooted, not through any force, but because everything they had tried to bury resurfaced. Their shame, their torment, reflected back at them in her presence. When she and Sam finally reached the trail, the snowfall had thickened considerably. He leaned heavily against her as they moved forward, blood trailing from his fingers, yet his gaze never left hers. At the house, she silently cleaned his injuries, wrapped his ribs carefully, and sat beside him until daylight returned. He never asked what she had done, and she never offered an explanation. Some truths are meant to perish only within the flames. Spring came unannounced, seeping through the thawing ground like a familiar melody half recalled in dreams. The snow melted in uneven patches, exposing dead grass, broken fence posts, and scattered bones of creatures that had not survived the harsh freeze. Yet, at the Pike Ranch's edge, the thaw brought more than just mud and decay. It brought color. Wildflowers broke through the soil where Lydia had planted nothing, their roots entwined with stones and ash, nourished by blood, memory, and something ancient beyond both. The house no longer creaked in the same way. The atmosphere inside had changed. Sam Pike rose early each day, not from bad dreams but from the steady rhythm of footsteps overhead. Light and purposeful her footsteps. She no longer moved like a person hiding. Her presence filled the house not as a mere echo or shadow, but as something alive and intentional. She now sang, rarely and without words, but in long, slow hums that drifted through the rafters and stretched into the fields like a spell, meant not to repel darkness, but to remind life of where it truly belonged. The villagers never spoke about what had taken place in the clearing. It was impossible for them to do so. Those who had seen her, who had heard her voice and emerged unchanged, bore the memory like a sharp edge just beneath their skin. None of them ventured back to Pike's property. Not with inquiries, not with torches. They left him in peace. Yet, occasionally, small tokens appeared at the gate. A bundle of herbs, a lamb's bone wrapped carefully in cloth, a strand of river beads. They never knocked. They never called out. They simply left these offerings, not out of fear, but out of a hesitant respect. And Lydia gathered them. Not every day, but whenever the wind shifted and she felt drawn. She kept them in a cedar box near the hearth, beneath the wooden spoon she had carved for him, next to the folded photo of Rose that Sam no longer concealed. Between them, something had formed, though neither would have dared to name it love aloud. Love felt too fragile, too easily shattered by the harsh world they had endured. What bound them was older, forged through labor and silence, and how she learned to mend his shirts without measuring, and how he adjusted the barn doors so she could lock them from inside if she wished. He never entered her room unless she left the door open. She never asked where he disappeared to before dawn and returned with dirt on his boots and eyes reddened. It did not matter. They were not keeping track. They were simply choosing to remain. Choosing to stay. One afternoon, with the sun casting long shadows over the ridge and the hens settling down quietly, Sam stood at the edge of the porch, watching Eddie kneel in the field, planting something from her palm into the soil. He couldn't tell what it was, and she did not volunteer the information. When she finally stood up, her hands covered in dirt, she looked at him for a long moment, then gestured toward the slope behind the shed. That evening, she led him there. In the darkness, with only a lantern glowing between them, she revealed the spot she had cleared. It was a garden of a sort, but not meant for food. Markers arranged in a wide circle were crafted from branches and old fence pieces, each tied with strips of cloth, some white, some black, others red. Kneeling by one, she said, "The others, from before." Her voice held steady. He didn't question who she meant. Instead, he placed his hand on her shoulder and stayed like that until the lantern flickered out. Weeks went by. She laughed once. The sound surprised them both. It was not light-hearted or carefree, but rough and beautiful, like something corroded finally breaking free. He had shared a story about a goat, something from many years ago, and her face had turned toward the window as if the sky might hold back her smile. Then the sound escaped her. She quickly covered her mouth, embarrassed. He didn't grin. He simply said softly, "That's what this house needed." On the first day of June, he discovered her near the porch steps carrying a bundle, a dress, not belonging to Rose, not borrowed from anyone. One she had crafted with her own hands, a deep crimson hue resembling dried cranberries in the rocky cliffs. She wore it as if it had formed from her very flesh, with bare feet brushing the dust and her hair flowing freely. He observed her descend the steps and step into the sunlight, and for a brief instant, everything else vanished. The war, the sorrow, the graves, the blood, even Rose. All of it faded into the quiet space between heartbeats. She stood before him, the fabric fluttering gently in the breeze, and said, "You can create a life from what was taken from you if you stop pretending you are still waiting to be punished." He moved closer and reached for her hand. This time she did not withdraw. She did not recoil. She simply held him. They remained there in the stillness, hidden from view, not needing to be watched. Above them, the sky stretched wide and patient, and the breeze carried no warnings. Only the aroma of earth warmed once more. No promises were exchanged. No oath spoken. Yet something concluded that day. Something that had to conclude, and in its place, something fresh emerged. Quiet, deserved, and completely their own.